Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Lisa Gunshore, and I'm so happy that it is Podcast Wednesday. Always love Wednesdays with all of our special guests, and welcome to the Buddhist Biohacker podcast, vlog, forum, whatever we are anymore. We're 11D media. That's what we are, conscious content. And for all of you guys joining in on the live, you are welcome to share your comments and questions in the live feed. I will be checking that throughout. For everybody who's listening to the replay or listening later on iTunes or Spotify, we have a forum now, which I'm so happy about, on MeWe.com. So if you go to MeWe.com, Buddhist Biohacker, we have our forum for discussion and continued discussion and questions about all of these podcasts. And MeWe is a great 5D, or we should say 11D here on the program, social media space. So it's private and it's special and it's a safe place for us to have these conversations. So, and then just a reminder for everybody joining in, you can also click subscribe. Don't forget to do that and you'll get notified when we do go live with all of our special guests. Okay, so with all of that said, I am really excited about our guests today. Our guest today is Barrie Risman. She is a yoga educator, a teacher, a trainer, and she's an author of this amazing book, Evolving Your Yoga, 10 Principles for Enlightened Practice. And I am so excited to have you here because your book is amazing. I love it so much. So welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to dig into all of this. And I was going through this and I have to get my glasses, pardon me for everybody. But I thought we would start. You have this book. I don't even know where I want to start. I'm like overwhelming myself here, but this book is fabulous because it's a self-inquiry journal, truly, with all of the information that you have. And so whether you're a yogi who's been practicing for 30 years, or whether you guys are like, I don't even know what yoga is, because I think we have a combination of that in our community, this is a book for you. And I wanted to start by asking you some of the questions in your very first chapter, where you said, when did you start yoga and where and what drew you to yoga? So I thought, what a great place to start, right from your book.
Sure. Yeah.
Your journey with yoga and what brought you to this in the first place.
Yeah, great. Well, actually, I've been thinking about that a lot, particularly this week with the announcement of Kripalu's temporary closing. Like so many other people, I went to Kripalu a few times, but it definitely reminds me of the very beginnings of my yoga journey, because the first time I went there was right at the beginning, back in 1992, when it was still an ashram. And I remember I drove up from New York City to Western Massachusetts, and I had been working as an office temp at the time and really just not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And I was a seeker, although I didn't know it at that time, but I definitely was asking those questions about how I want to live and the possibility of having a life that does not necessarily conform to just, a steady, dependable career and a retirement package and all that, many of the values that I was brought up with. So I was looking for something for sure. And places like Kripalu and other places started to open my eyes to this possibility that there could be something more to life. And then they're just at that time in New York City, there weren't yoga studios on every corner like there have been. Maybe there won't be anymore, but as we go, things are changing. But there at that time, there did happen to be a studio right on my block. And so I just started taking classes, and I had a gymnastics and dance background, and I'm quite a flexible body type. So the postures of yoga came quite easily to me. And that's, like many people, I came in through the physical practice and loved it so much. I went right into a teacher training, and I was fortunate to have an initial teacher training that did focus on the bigger context for the yoga practice and some of the wisdom teachings. And that was really how I started down the path of not only hatha yoga, but meditation and contemplation as part of an integrated yoga practice.
I love it. And one of the quotes from your book, you said, and I'm digging into this right away for everybody who's listening, if you're new to yoga, No matter if you've never practiced in your life, you're going to get so much from all of this information, because really yoga is everything in every part of your life. And one of the things that you said was physical postures alone are just exercise. It is the context and understanding with which we perform the postures that makes them yoga. And this is important because, part of Buddhist Biohacker is all about sharing what we can do for our health that's truly aligned with our spirit. And so many, especially in the United States, are pushing through power vinyasas. They're running marathons. They're pushing their body to the limits. They're like working their body. And there's not a connection, or they're missing the connection between that physical practice and the actual context of the practice, no matter what it is, whether it's a yoga posture or running or whatever. And so I want you to talk more about this and talk more about what you mean when you say it's the context behind those physical postures.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question, because I think and I definitely agree with you that it is time right now more than ever. There's no more time to waste in really taking hold of all we can to better ourselves so that we can serve other people and that we can contribute to the healing and wholeness that will happen on the other side of what we're all experiencing right now. And I think what happened with yoga in particular was that it came to the West largely in the 1970s as kind of a hippie spiritual alternative lifestyle practice. And in the 80s and 90s, it entered the mainstream North American fitness culture, where it became co-opted by those values, I think. And so we kept a very superficial part of yoga and started using it for our fitness ideals, for our Western, in a way that kind of stripped it or truncated it from its roots. And in some ways, there's nothing wrong with that, because I think yoga as a tradition is very comfortable being reinterpreted and adapted to however we want to use it and need to use it. And certainly there is great physical benefit in just the postures themselves. And having the availability of yoga so widespread also makes it an entryway. I mean, how many teachers do we know that, started in the power vinyasa workout mode, and after a while, a switch got flicked and they started becoming more self-aware as a result of the practice. So there's lots of benefit to all that. Mm-hmm. And I think what I found was missing in the mainstream North American culture was resources or strategies for those people who have been doing the physical practice for a while, right? Since the 90s, there's a whole generation of us that have been practicing yoga, but we may not have any understanding of that bigger context that actually makes it more than just movement. Right? Yeah. Because a class venue is not the place to do that. It's not, people want to move when you go to a class. So the teacher can't give a whole philosophy talk. That's not why people are there. So what happened was, I think that, as you probably know, one of the only ways to go deep in your practice is to enter teacher training, right? And that is a lot of times, in any teacher training, usually at least half and usually more than half of the people are there, not because they want to be teachers, but because they want to go deeper. And there's just not anything else available outside of the regular class context.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I totally believe that everyone should take a yoga teacher training. Every posture I was doing was incorrectly aligned, because you never have the time to understand what you're actually doing in a class, nor do you understand what is happening behind the scenes while you're doing it. So sorry to interrupt, but I just absolutely.
No, I think that's a great point, because I think that those of us who have been practicing yoga as just a physical practice, it's like, we know we feel better beyond the physical. I mean, everyone knows that you feel better in your mind, you feel more centered, however we want to articulate that. We know yoga works on all these different levels. We know the breath is involved in some way, but we don't understand why or how, or even the idea that when you feel more centered after a yoga class, that is deliberate. There's a specific reason why that happens, and a way that yoga works. It's a technology for awakening consciousness in the body, right? And connecting us to that unchanging awareness, right? So there's this whole beautiful articulation of how yoga works that on one level, it's helpful just to give words to our experience, right? To understand what's happening when we go to a yoga class, right? And then there's the whole other level of how do we bring these practices or the benefits we get on our mat into our lives. And that's really where we need that bigger context. And traditionally asana, the postural practice, was never practiced outside of other practices, outside of a contemplative practice, a reflective practice, a study practice. So we've lost that. And so for people that are interested in that, people that are interested in getting more out of what they do on the mat and using yoga to serve them in their lives, there just wasn't that much out there. So I started to think, like, what have been for me and for the people I've taught, the main understandings, the main strategies really that have allowed me and my students to make that leap, right? To get more out of the physical practice itself. Because I think when you have that bigger context for who we are as human beings, for the vision of yoga, it deepens your experience of the physical practice, and it helps bridge the physical practice into your life in a very natural and authentic way.
Mm-hmm. Which I love. And let's talk about this dichotomy. Most of our community that has been engaging with the Buddhist Biohacker platform are healers and spiritual workers, and a lot of all of our clients who are doing meditation practices, who dove into the summits with contemplation and shadow work and all these things. And they're like, I don't know what yoga is. And so what I love about your book, and what I want to talk about here, is if you're in the physical practice, this takes you to the spiritual. But if you're in the spiritual practice, this can bring you to the physical. And what does that look like?
I'm so glad you said that, because I think for those of us who are more comfortable kind of in those more subtle, mystical or spiritual realms, and I'm going up as I say that,
Yes,
right?
Yes.
It's really, what yoga teaches, and particularly the non-dual tantric vision of yoga, is that transformation or attainment in yoga is really not this up and out process. Mm-hmm. That it happens within the body. And that actually we need a body. Like, we need to be in a body to really fulfill our mission here, I believe, to fulfill our purpose. So one of the wonderful paradoxes, I think, of asana practice, and I think one of the reasons why I love it so much, is that it's using the body to know something beyond the body. So that as we start to develop that more subtle understanding, we are also including this physicality in that is not a contradiction. Spiritual attainment doesn't have to be separate from being in our bodies, from honoring our bodies, from being in our full physicality. Mm-hmm. But rather it's an extension. It can be included in that. So it's a wonderful paradox of, particularly of asana practice, because it's using the body, right? It's using the body to, again, know this more transcendental place. And so we end up, and this is an idea I've been thinking about a lot. It's one of the principles in the book called balancing the pairs of opposites. I think now more than ever, we need to be able to hold both of those things, what's happening concretely in our world, the manifest world, and we need to bring our, more subtle sensibilities to bear on that.
Yeah, and let's talk about that more, because I have a note here about integration and that whole principle that you talk about bringing the opposites together. And in fact, we're talking with Julie Hoyle, T-minus a few hours, about deep diving into shadow work. And I think that there's a large amount of the community that goes to a yoga class or engages even in a book like yours or whatever it is, because you're wanting to lift out or lift off or whatever it is you think you need to do. And it's so important in this particular time that we live in to integrate the spirit with the body, because we need that in order to bring the vibration of the planet and the ethereal energies all into one space, you know, bringing the yin and the yang. So I don't know what else you want to say about that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about just integration and more about, you know, bringing those opposites together, because it's crucial right now.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to say about integration, but what came up as you were speaking was the word grounding. That
Mm,
we need to get really grounded, right? Even as an asana teacher, I work a lot with the feet and the legs, and I think that's why I think it's really important for all of us right now to stay grounded. But the other idea that I think is a really beautiful entry into this is the idea that the body, that, you know, that one of the basic understandings in yoga is that the same energies that live all around us in nature are exist within the human body, and so the human body is kind of a microcosmic representation of the universal. It contains everything in it. And so, one of the really beautiful ways I think of integrating the physical practice with the more spiritual practices is to understand that you know, if the body contains the earth, the water, the fire, the air, the space, the rivers, the mountains, then by going within and kind of awakening consciousness within the physical body, we are awakening a deeper connection with all of life, and ultimately the journey of yoga is about discovering that we have an interconnection to all of life right inside ourselves. And so again, the body, with this framework of the body as the microcosm, is one that has really unfolded for me over the years, in a way that has allowed my practice to be one of integration between myself as an individual and the universal.
oh, that's so beautifully put.
Oh, good.
Beautifully put. And it's just, it's so important that we don't try to fly out to the ethers. I love Magenta Pixie says we don't want to be fluffy bunnies. And it's true, we want to integrate the physical, and it's not easy. So I'm the opposite of you. So you're hyper flexible, I'm hyper mobile or hyper stable. So I'm really strong, but the flexibility is not there for me. And so in some ways I am grateful for it. Every time I go into practice, I'm grateful for my tight hamstrings, because I feel like it forces me. I'm very vata and very floaty and ethereal. And so it forces me to be in my body and to feel the discomfort and the shifts and the transformation. And one thing you said here is, it's not if your practice evolves, but how. And just a very brief story about me, because I want to hear what you have to say about this, because I really connected with that statement when you were talking about it's not if it evolves, but how. Is I'm 41 years old and could never touch my toes, was a cheerleader, could never touch my toes, couldn't do the splits, like none of those things. So I've been practicing yoga for like 15 years and not really a whole lot of progress physically, but I did it for my nervous system. I actually went into yoga asana practices. I Googled, searched, like, what do I do to heal my nervous system? And it profoundly changed my life. So this year, I went through teacher training just last year. And this year I thought, okay, like, this is the year I'm going to make progress. And I did things differently. And this is where I really connect with your book. And what I want you to share with everyone is, it's not about pushing through power vinyasas and chaturangas. It's truly about evolving your practice, which in turn evolves you. And Iyengar says in Light on Life, he says, you know, if you're not flexible in the body, you can't be flexible in life. And I really took that to heart. And I started looking at my ability to be flexible in all aspects of my life. And since January 1st, I've gotten 9 inches out of my hamstrings, and I can put my hands on the earth with my legs straight for the first time in my entire life. And that came through just diligent, disciplinary practice. You talk about tapas in your book and what tapas is, and that is what I have been doing. And it has been so incredible because I've seen the changes in my life structure. It's not even about the body. And so I just want to talk more about that. And your quote, It's not if it evolves, but how it evolves, and how does your practice evolve, and how does it impact your life?
Right. Yeah, those are great questions. And we were talking before we went live about how we both love, asking questions.
Yes.
And I think that touches on a real key to evolving one's practice and how that happens, because exactly as you just described, I think a lot of how it happens is through that reflective self-inquiry, that we become more self-aware. We start asking questions like, how am I flexible in my life? If I'm not flexible in my body, how is my flexibility in my life? And I also love what you said, because you quoted BKS Iyengar, the wonderful yoga master.
Yes.
And so it is very much through the teachings, right? And through yoga as a path of studentship, right? Not necessarily even a student of a particular person, but a student of a wisdom tradition. That I think really feeds that self-inquiry. So it's not just random questions, right? It's that yoga does have a clear trajectory of how we evolve.
Yes.
It's not just, anything, any way, right? And so the questions, we kind of filter the questions or answer the questions through the lens of our own experience, coupled with the wisdom from our tradition. And I think those things together is really what an evolving is really how we start to evolve our practice, by simply asking those questions, being willing to take a look under the hood of our motivations for our practice. And so we start to see, and we start to get a little bit of distance, right? Sometimes in the yoga tradition, we call it witness consciousness, that awareness of ourselves from outside ourselves. We start to be able to see our actions and our motivations from a clearer light, in a clearer light. And that's when we start to have a choice about how we shift or whether we shift. So, it's a beautiful path that I think unfolds for everyone differently. Right? If we want it to be an authentic path, as you said, everybody's body's different. The body is changing over time. And that's, one of the reasons I wrote that sentence. It's not if our practice will evolve, it's how. It's because we're evolving, where our roles are changing. There have been times in my life where I've been able to practice for 2 hours, 6 days a week, and times where, my practice is whatever I could do for 20 minutes on my mat, or while I was nursing my daughter when she was a baby. So I think our practice evolves because we evolve, because our body changes over time. I turned 50 a few months ago. So the 50-year-old body is not wanting the same. Thanks. The 50-year-old body is not the same as the 25-year-old body. And so I think sometimes we get stuck in this idea that our practice has to stay the same as it was. Otherwise it's not good anymore, or we're not doing well. But the truth is that practice has to evolve. And just one interesting anecdote is, for the book, I interviewed 26 longtime teachers. And one of the questions I asked them was, how has your practice evolved over the years? And I was really curious to hear what they said. And they all had slightly different responses, but one common theme was the practice for them has gone from the more physical to the more subtle. And I think that's what happens as we get older.
Yes.
That the practice starts to serve a different role for us. Also, again, because our bodies have been changing, but also our sensitivity, our awareness, and our sensibility has shifted. And we start to become more interested in breath work, for example, or contemplation. So again, I think it evolves differently for everyone in their own way. And I think there is also a commonality of going from gross to subtle.
Yes.
From outside to in.
I love it. You talked about studentship, and that was one of the notes. I really liked the description between being a student versus being a consumer. And I want to talk a little bit about those differences. What does studentship mean? And what are the differences between being a student and a consumer? Because I think it's true not just for yoga, but for all really anything, but especially in any kind of spiritual work or spiritual modality, I think it's really important to look at the difference between those two.
Absolutely. And the difference in the potential and possibility of those two. Because again, I say that, I have that question, are you a yoga consumer or a yoga student? And I don't really want there to be a judgment in that. Like, I think it's okay if you approach yoga as a service to be consumed.
Yeah.
I just think if you want to grow as a person from yoga, there's a real opportunity lost. There's a real opportunity in being a student, in other words. And so just to back up, we were talking earlier about the transformation that happened when yoga became part of the North American fitness culture. And I think part of what happened when yoga became so widely available was it went from, so the teachings and the practices of yoga way back were not freely given. Right. You had to kind of prove your worthiness, so to speak, as a student. You had to prove your readiness to receive the teachings, to receive the practices. Now, that's perhaps an extreme, but we've gone to the other extreme where I believe we've created a consumer culture around yoga where studios and are working to give, the customer's always right kind of mindset. And I thought a lot, because I'm not only a yoga teacher, but I've been a studio owner. And one of the things I learned from being a studio owner is that the difference between the student-teacher relationship is different from the client business owner relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if I'm approaching my yoga class as a business person, my biggest concern is I want to give this client what they want, so they'll come back, so they'll continue to be my client.
Yeah.
Whereas, a teacher doesn't always give the student what they seem to want. The teacher's role is to give the student what they need.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And particularly in yoga, that gets tricky, because yoga's all about going beyond your limited ideas of who you are and your ego in the yogic sense. And that's, you mentioned tapas earlier. That is not always comfortable. That's not always easy. There has to be a level of trust with the person that you're learning from, right? And at the same time, once you approach yoga from that perspective of being a student and wanting to learn and wanting to grow, and you have a teacher that you trust or a set of teachings that you trust, well, then the possibility for practice is so greatly expanded, right? It's like a student takes responsibility for their learning. A student is invested in their growth. A student, shows up. There's a whole different dynamic when one approaches yoga as a student. And even though there are the challenges with the student-teacher relationship, and so it's not like we have to have one teacher or one person. The teacher, ultimately, I think a good yoga teacher is someone who helps you trust your own self and learn from your own inner wisdom and get in touch with your own guidance, So again, I just think the posture of a student in yoga is just a really rich, fertile place to be. And so that's why I really wanted to write about it, because again, I think in the mainstream yoga culture, we kind of got away from that. I think now actually there's a possibility that we can go back to that a little bit in a healthier, more empowered way, because now we're not in person, right?
Yeah.
And so we are on our own, whether we're doing classes on Zoom or whether we're doing our own practice. There's a sense of being with oneself that I think has a lot of possibility.
Yes. I agree. So I would love to just kind of throw this out there. Like, if you think back, what's one of your most difficult, like when you think of tapas, and for everyone out there, tapas is really self-discipline, I think is the best way to summarize it. And I only laugh because I can think of my own experiences, but what is like one of those experiences for you with tapas where it was like, that was really hard. It was really worth it, but it was really hard.
Yeah, well, The first thing that comes to mind is waking up early. That's always been hard for me.
I
But
love
when
that. I'm not a morning person either.
yeah. And, when I lived in India at an ashram, that gave new meaning to the word waking up early, because there, if you woke up at 6 a.m., you kind of missed a lot already.
No.
So, the daily schedule began at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh,
So
God.
between 3:30 and 6, if you woke up at 6, you missed your chai, you missed the morning chant, you missed meditation, you missed a lot. And so that was really hard. I mean, I did it, I would say, very regularly for about a year and a half. I lived there for 4 years. So a year and a half, I did it. And then I started kind of slacking off. And, the tapas, the word tapas, the root means to heat. And so it's a kind of friction. I think of it as a kind of friction that happens, the heat that happens when, a habitual way of being rubs up against a more expanded way of being. And yes, I think self-discipline is a huge part of it. But I just remember that feeling of heat when sometimes I would wake up at 6:30 in the morning and I would hear, the sounds that meant all those morning practices were over. And it was just like such regret and such, I could really feel a fire actually in that. So thank you for reminding me of that. good to remember.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think for me, it was, I was a normal consumer of, fast food and all that stuff. I worked in fashion retail, and in 2010, I got very ill, very, very ill, and found out that I had parasites that were attacking my my liver and my brain and all these things. And I had to go completely off of everything I'd ever known with my diet. I had to go no carbs. I had to clear out everything, no soda. Oh my gosh, can't imagine having any of that now. But that was definitely the fire of tapas. It was that moment where you're like, this is not feeling good, and you just have to do it, and you just do it every day. And I think it's funny because whether it's, getting up early for practices or changing your diet, we are all in tapas right now as a globe, having to sit with ourselves, having to cook our own meals because a lot of things have been closed, having to isolate ourselves, having to make different decisions. And so what would you say is your best advice for everyone out there? I mean, things are starting to open up in the US, but nothing's ever going to be the same again. So what's your advice to everyone out there who's listening now and later? How do you survive the fire of tapas?
That's such a great question. So the way I think of it is in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which are one of the most important texts of the yoga tradition, tapas is one of 3 elements of a transformational yoga practice. And I write about this in the book. Mm-hmm. So perhaps it would help everyone to understand that tapas doesn't have to happen alone. So tapas itself is just like fire. It's a destructive process or deconstructive process. It chips away, which can be profoundly uncomfortable. Diet is one of the huge areas, right, where it just bumps up against so much known and unconscious stuff, right? So there is a chipping away with tapas, a clearing out. But it's not meant to be practiced on its own, because the second element that's given to us by the tradition is what's called swadhyaya, or self-inquiry, or self-study. And this is the edifying aspect of practice. It's where we get to turn to the wisdom tradition to find out what's on the other side of that tapas, which is the beauty of one's own heart, the freedom of not being, or good health, right? So I would say that if you're going through tapas, turn to whatever sacred tradition you resonate with, because they all say the same thing. study it, read about it, read the lives of the great beings, read what people who have made it. There is no master teacher, no great being has gotten there without tremendous hardship or austerity, or right, and they've made it to the other side. So you can read poetry, you can read, whatever sacred tradition you're drawn to, go there, because that's where you're going to find the encouragement. While you're experiencing this destructive or deconstructive aspect, you're going to be able to fill yourself up with a new way of being, that you're making space for that new way of being with tapas. So that second element of study, I think, must go with it, because that's what's going to give us the inspiration, the perseverance, the fortitude to keep going. And then the third aspect that yoga offers is I think really beautiful, and maybe it's something that you also experience on your journey with diet. It's that of offering, just letting go. And that's, of course, that is coming up huge for so many of us right now. It's like we are having to let go of so much, as you say. So there is that spirit in the Sanskrit. It's called Ishwar Pranidhana, or dedication to the Lord, but you don't have to think of it as Lord. You can think of it as spirit or source or nature or energy, whatever word you're comfortable with, just offering it to the bigger picture, to the bigger energy, I think is a beautiful way of kind of completing that cycle of how to move through tapas.
I love that. Well, and your speaking is like, I love it whenever you talk to any teacher and you're one of them, the light just expands and there's all these openings. And as you're talking, it's making me think, and I made a note here, when you think of Svadhyaya, which is so much of what I do with my clients, and I think probably so much of what you do, especially because that's in your book and what you're talking about. And I just wonder, like, this question popped in my head. I wonder what the global self-inquiry is at this time, and I think about the creating a planet that's sustainable. Tari Ward spoke a few weeks ago on the transformation of the machine cosmology, about being a viable human. Are we a viable human? Are we creating a sustainable world? Are we seeing what is dismantling, or what wants to dismantle, in order for us to be healthy? And then, yes, talking about letting go and surrender, we're stepping into a time of the divine feminine, the rise of the divine feminine, and the divine feminine lives in the unknown. And so there's such a potency with that of letting go. And at one point in one of my health crises, and I wrote about it in my book, I knew I was going to leave. I knew it was time to go and leave the earth. And there was this moment of just letting go. Like, if this is going to happen, I have to be okay with it. And that letting go is when everything came flooding in. And I am still here. And I did make it through that time. And it's changed the way that I view my life. And so I love what you're saying, because it's so true. Like, the important thing is to push through whatever that fire is. And for a lot of us, we're pushing through that fire in our yoga practices. Used to be in a studio, and now we're all at home trying to do it, and probably beating ourselves up if we can't do it when we are at home, and all those other mental things that go on. But I think it's important. I just reiterating what you're saying is, it's so important to know, like, don't just push through the physical practice, but ask yourself why you're pushing through it, and allow yourself to surrender to the practice, because that's when things change. And I've had those moments myself in a yoga class, or even just practicing yoga at home, is when you just really let yourself go into a posture, and it's like, wow, I'm really feeling this posture right now. It transforms your mind and your body and everything at once. It's amazing. So well said. I want to talk about a couple of things, because I made a bunch of notes here. So when we talk about the practice, and I don't remember where in this conversation I even made this note, but I wrote down, that the practice of asana is a vehicle for awakening, because you were talking about, it does, even if all you're doing is the physical practice, it's opening. At what point for you, was there like a moment for you where you knew that there was an awakening of some kind occurring within you? Like, how did that feel? What was that moment like?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question. Um, yeah, I think the first time, so in those early classes I used to go to back in the early 90s in Manhattan, it was a very traditional yoga studio, as you would think of, you enter in and there's incense and there's Sanskrit chant playing, and none of it made any sense to me. There were statues, there were pictures, and it was all, I didn't understand anything, except that when I would leave the class, I felt like, I don't know if you remember those old fashioned tape counters, the analog tape counters that would count up, to track the time of the tape. And then you would push the button and it would all be reset. That's the only way I can decide. That's the only way I can talk about it. It was like, I felt like my tape counter was reset.
Oh,
So I
wow.
definitely noticed there was something happening on the level of my mind, but I didn't understand any of the philosophy or anything. Sometimes we would, at the end of the class, the teacher would always lead us through a few minutes. And I think my first clue was that sometimes those meditations, still to this day, are some of the deepest meditations I've ever had. And even though they lasted for 3 minutes on the clock, I would come out and felt like I had been there for hours. And it was like, what is going on here?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, for all of us, there's that moment where we really experience that yoga is more than a physical practice. Like, we might know it intellectually, like we've heard it. But to actually have that experience of being in Shavasana, for example, and you're just not in your body for a few minutes, like you're just somewhere else and you don't know what that is or where that is, but there's something more, right? It opens the doorway. Yeah.
I love it. Why should someone practice yoga? I'm certain that there are many folks on here, and I have a lot of folks in my community who I know are listening who know that I teach yoga and really aren't sure. I get a lot of messages saying, well, I'm not really flexible, or, gosh, I don't really know anything about it. And so there's this barrier of like, do I do this thing, And
Yeah.
so why should someone practice yoga? What's this entry level reason?
Yeah, right. Well, again, I think that just to back up, I think part of that comes from what we're shown in the mainstream yoga culture, like what a yoga body looks like, what we should be able to do if we're, every teacher knows when someone says I'm not flexible, I can't do yoga, the answer is, well, that's why you do yoga is to become flexible, right? But I totally understand that for people from the outside, and it's like, I can't do that because we're used to these mainstream images. So I really want to encourage all of us to reclaim our right to move our body joyfully. And for me, the core of it is we practice yoga to honor this vehicle of the body, to take care of ourselves, to breathe better, and even if we do it as purely a physical practice, it will affect our minds. It will affect our spirits, even if we're not aware of that on a conscious level. So I would say the most basic reason to do yoga is to take care of your body, and all that, and the body being a vehicle or an instrument or a house right, for something much greater, and so yoga also gives us access to that.
I love it. I love it. And, you have in here, you talk about the true yogic lifestyle. And I thought it would be fun to throw out some of those things for everybody who's listening, because I think for all of you listening now or on the replay later, you're going to find that there's many things you're already doing. You wouldn't even be listening to this podcast if there weren't things you're already doing that are part of a true yogic lifestyle. So what are some of those things?
Well, again, just to frame what I call a true yogic lifestyle is I contrast it from, what we're kind of the yoga lifestyle we're kind of sold. Again, which up until a few months ago meant, fancy yoga retreats or traveling to certain destinations to practice yoga or wearing a certain brand of pants or, buying a certain kind of water bottle, the external things. Not that any of those things are wrong. It's just that what I really want us to reclaim is this idea that a true yoga lifestyle comes from within. It comes from an inner experience. So when for example, we talked about yoga as a path toward discovering an interconnection with all of life. If you've had that experience, I believe you will naturally respect the planet and nature because you have the experience of deep inner connection, right? When you experience deeper connection with other people, you will naturally want to be a nicer, kinder person. So I think one of the most obvious ways a yogic lifestyle is expressed is in kindness. Just and I've been noticing this in myself right now in this time of social isolation and distancing. That when I go to the supermarket, people are more hesitant to look at each other.
Yeah.
And I make a real effort to smile. It actually has an effect on the person. There's a neurological response we have when we see people smile. And so I think of all the people who are in isolation now that don't see other faces. And so I think politeness, kindness, just being a nice person is a really great expression of being a yogi,
It's so true that compassion, being compassionate with other people is can change somebody's whole day. And sometimes
in ways that we don't know, especially now. And again, it's not because if we don't do it, we're not good people. It's not a should. It's because if it comes out of the recognition that we're all in this together, right? That will naturally foster politeness, simple kindness to other people. So I think that's one way.
Yes, I absolutely agree. One of the things that Iyengar talks about that I love, obviously I'm a total Iyengar junkie, but he just says so many amazing things. It's like so profound. But one of the things he talks about is meditation really being one of the last petals of yoga, that really you can't expect your mind to be quiet and still if you haven't been able to work through these other aspects with the physical. And it's funny because for so long in the metaphysical community, the goal was to get out of your body. The goal was astral travel. The goal is meditation. The goal is all these things. And, as a psychic medium, that certainly was a part of my life and my process and all these things. And one thing that yoga's brought to me, going back to that word groundedness, is it grounded me into my body where I could finally take action on what I was receiving from the ethereal spaces. There's in Strength Finders, there's 33 behaviors in top executives around the country. They did this huge survey. And one of these 33 behaviors is called activator. And I've noticed in the spiritual community that being an activator is really low on the list. There's a lot of information and a lot of energy and spiritual energy. And then it's like, oh, how do we take action on those things? And so I think that yoga practice gives you the ability to ground out the ideas and take action on them. And so I wonder how your meditation practice has changed through your yoga practice. Did you find meditation through yoga? Did meditation bring you to yoga? Like, what does that look like for you? And what have you experienced in your own meditation practice through your physical practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think your insight into being able to take action is really important. And I really see that as the word alignment came up. It's like as we move more into alignment with our spirit, aligning our spirit, our minds, our bodies, our breath, then I think it is easier for us then to take action. We're just like, we become a kind of a clear channel, but a channel capable of putting things into the world and doing. So I really like that. Thank you for sharing that. And in terms of meditation, you know, I've been meditating regularly since 1993. And like I said, those first few minutes of meditation at the end of those initial classes in the early 90s were some of my deepest experiences, you know. So I've gone through periods where I've certainly gone deep. And I've gone through a lot of periods where my mind is active, you know, and I think what's important for people to understand is that, yes, you know, in one sense, we can think about meditation as being that state that Iyengar talks about, the kind of the final stage where the mind becomes quiet.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want anyone to think that you can't meditate, if that meditation only happens with a quiet mind.
Mm.
That is definitely not the case. That is, I think, one of the biggest obstacles that people face in meditation is they say, I can't do it. What's really important to understand is meditation is natural. It's like sleep or any other natural capacity we have. Meditation is part of who we are. If we look around the natural world, we see animals are in that flow. They're in meditation. When you get absorbed in anything you love to do, that is a kind of meditation. Meditation, one of the translations for meditation in yoga is absorption. So anytime you're completely absorbed in something, you are meditating on some level.
I love that.
And when we talk about meditation in yoga, what really helped me make peace with my mind, because now, you know, of course, I love those moments where my mind goes quiet and there is you know, you're just, I just feel so congruent with my heart. You know, there's definitely those moments and those are great, but I always say meditation is whatever happens when you sit for meditation. So I don't ever want that to be an expectation. You know, that's a gift when it comes. But the shift that really helped me was, you know, just like seeing the body as part and parcel of everything in the universe. The energy that moves the mind is the same. That there is a perspective we can adopt. And again, this is the perspective of non-dual tantra, that the mind is just another form of universal energy. The mind is there to think. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful tool. It allows us, as you say, to go from, you know, an inner feeling or an inner experience to take things into action. I mean, the mind does incredible things. So we never want to fight with our minds or become enemies of our minds. What we can do instead is just learn to witness the thoughts. We can let the thoughts be there as we meditate. And that's the whole purpose of having a technique like your breath or a mantra. And any meditation technique is simply there as a focusing technique for your mind. So we can have those techniques that we go back to. So we can just let the mind do its thing. Some days it's going to be more active. It may depend on what we've eaten before, how much we've slept. I mean, there's what else is going on in our lives. So many things that are going to affect the quality of our thoughts and the quantity of our thoughts and the energy of our thoughts. But in a certain way, when we meditate, we don't have to really worry so much about that. We can just let the thoughts be there, and we can adopt a bigger perspective. One of the definitions of meditation I love is it's about developing a relationship with yourself that's bigger than your mind. So, you know, we have an understanding that there's the thinking mind, but there's also that which knows, you know, the whole idea that you can know what you think. Like if I ask you now, what are you thinking? You could tell me. And that's so simple. We often don't think about it, but it's pretty wild that, you know, as far as we know, human beings are the only kind of what we call self-relational creatures, meaning we have a relationship with our minds. And that's really what meditation is. It's about, Eckhart Tolle talks sometimes about the foreground and the background, that the thinking mind is like the foreground. That's where we usually live.
Yes.
And meditation, we're getting to know that background.
Oh, I love that.
And so whatever's happening in the foreground can just be there. And we just take some time to connect with our breathing or look out at the trees and be in that background place. And that is extremely refreshing, right? Rejuvenating.
Oh, I love that so much. Well, and there's so much happening in our mind right now on the planet. And I know for me, and this just goes back to the yoga practice, and I share this because I know some of you guys that are listening have this experience, is when you are tuned into your gifts and into the world of spirit. If I sit, that's what shows up. So if I want peace, if I want to be with myself with a capital S, I practice yoga, because the physical movement of my body stops everything else. It stops not just the shopping lists and the thoughts of to-do lists and all those things, but it also releases somehow the spirit world, where you can truly just listen to the Mahashunya, the great void, and you're in a different space. And so it's just so important. And so for many of you that are listening who have spiritual practices, if you're not practicing yoga, this is the integration. This is the way you bring it all together. And this is how you take action right now. So many folks are saying, how do I take action? What do I do about our planet? Practice yoga, because you can get all the information you want about where we're headed, but if you're not moving that energy and integrating it into the planetary 3-dimensional experience, then we're not doing what we're meant to do here. And that brings me to my last question. I could talk to you for hours. I mean, we have just scratched the surface of what you have to offer in all ways, but even just in this book alone. I mean, I really hope I can have you back on, because it's so much to talk about. But my last question for you today is, we are in the middle of a global event, an experience, an ascension, an awakening, whatever you want to call it. Things are changing. So with all of your experience and your yoga trainings and your writings and all of these things, what is your message for everyone today? Like, what do you want to say to everybody? And what do you think, like, what's your action step? Like, what's next for you in all of this?
Well, I think the one thing I would tell everybody is, whether it's yoga or whatever else you do, find ways to renew yourself, because this is a very demanding time on many different levels. And if we don't have reliable, healthy ways to find renewal, it's going to be harder. So whether that's being I'm finding great renewal by being in nature, by having a little bit of time in silence every day, to find those things that bring you a deep soul renewal. I think is one thing. And for me, I just got finished co-teaching a course on the Bhagavad Gita, where the course was called The Triumph of the Heart, the Triumphant Heart, rather. And I've been thinking about this idea of the triumph of the heart, and the heart being the essential goodness that yoga tells us that at the very deepest level of our existence is a place of goodness and light. And probably a lot of people listening know that. But I think taking hold of those qualities which express that, things we were talking about, the yogic virtues, compassion, generosity, patience, fearlessness, perseverance, resilience, that all these qualities that we might want to experience more of in ourselves, they are, yoga teaches us that they are part of who we are. They are our deepest essence. So the more we can come back, and that is triumphant. That is triumphant, that there is, I've been thinking a lot about the heroism we're seeing all around us in ways people are acting and stepping forward. And this idea of the human spirit being heroic is really encouraging to me right now. And it's, I think it's a way we can respond to all we're seeing in a way that creates more of the world we want to see. So I would say take hold of the qualities you want to experience more of in yourself. Know that you have them within you, and find support through whatever you do to cultivate them and to remember them every day as a practice.
It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for being on my show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, you're just a gift to our community and to everybody who listens now and later. It's Barrie Risman. Her book is Evolving Your Yoga. But she has so much more than this, you guys, to offer. And all of this information will be in the show notes, and her bio and contact information will be there as well. And again, we can keep this discussion going. So join us on MeWe.com. For a safe, secure space to have a public forum about all of these things that we've been talking about on the Buddhist Biohacker. Barrie, I am so thankful to meet you for so many reasons. And when I started going through your book, I was like, oh my gosh, so much of this speaks to my own journey. And I hope to have you back.
Great. Thank you. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I made a note
Yeah.
here, I made a note about renewal. I think what a great topic next. And I know
Yeah.
it's a whole principle in your book, so we
Right,
got to talk
right.
about it. And to everybody watching, don't forget to click the subscribe button. The main reason is less about subscribers and more about you getting the notification when we go live so that you know that somebody special is talking. And I'm just so honored. I don't know what we're doing here, but I love it and it's amazing. So thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for being on, and thank you to everybody listening. And I will be back here in just a few hours with Julie Hoyle to talk about the shadow.
Great.
Or self-inquiry.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, great to be with you. And thank you for all you're doing. And I look forward to continuing on.
Me too. Much love to you. And
Yeah,
much
lots
love
of love.
to everybody else out there. Have a nice day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.